Hello, my friends. It's the Grimflayer back with some more Mono Blue Taking Turns gameplay. Let's get right into it. So we are on the play, and we have an interesting hand here. We have 3 land, which is usually the ideal number, and we have mine effects, which are always nice. However, we have 3 mine effects. That's kind of a lot. We also have Temporal Mastery, which is just about the worst card to have in your opener in most matchups. So the hand is medium. It can be very good or it can be very bad. We lack interaction, and if we're against a really fast deck, we stand a pretty good chance of getting run over. But on the play, I definitely don't think we can reasonably mulligan this. Even on the draw, this might be a keep, but on the play, it's a keep for sure. So we've got Island and Pass. Let's see what the opponent is up to. Marsh Flats. Godless Shrine. Inquisition of Kozilek. Okay, so we are against a BWX mid-range deck. Almost certainly this could be, just thinking off the top, black-white tokens, Abzan Midrange, straight-up black-white mid-range, some kind of Eldrazi and Taxes deck. Regardless, these interactive types of decks are generally a bad matchup for us. We're generally not favored. However, our hand is spectacular against them. They are not going to put on a fast clock, or at least not an extremely fast clock to compare with some of the linear decks of the format, and we have all the redundancy we could want in terms of mine effects. So let's see what the opponent likes here. They're going to take the Howling Mine. Makes sense. It's our early play. Still would not have been entirely surprised to see them take a Dictate there, however, just because they benefit a little bit more from us sticking a Howling Mine than from a Dictate, but we'll see what they have in store. We draw another land off the top. Alright, not much we can do except pass the turn. Our opponent shows us a Forest and a Tarmogoyf. Okay, Abzan it is. Back to us. Yet another island. Now, we do need land drops, but, a Remand there, for example, would have been pretty nice. But in this matchup, sticking the turn 3 Dictate is a pretty high priority, even though they're one of the few decks that packs a decent number of main deck answers to it. So, we're going to go ahead and pass. With shields down, we don't have anything we can do here. Opponent's fetching main phase, that's not a good sign. And they're shocking. And there it is, the classic BGX ideal curve. It's not the most ideal curve in every matchup, but it's kind of the ideal generic curve, or one of the ideal blind curves. You go turn 1 discard into turn 2 threat, Tarmogoyf being their biggest threat, into turn 3 Liliana. This is a really tough one for us to beat. It really is. However, our draw has equipped us with just about the best possible chance to do it. Our opening hand and our draw have lined up fairly well against what they're doing. So, here comes the Liliana tick up. Now, here, it's pretty obvious. We've just got to ditch the turn spell. We're really far away from casting it. We've got to keep making our land drops. We've got to stick these Dictates. So they ditch a Lingering Souls. Good value for them. Their really nice curve out continues. They're going to smack us for 3. And then on the end step, we'll flash in the Dictate. We're drawing a Cryptic Command and a Part the Water Veil. Okay. Pretty good draws. Part the Water Veil, not as much as Cryptic, because we still are under pressure from Liliana. We still are a few turns away from casting it. So Part the Water Veil is not ideal, but Cryptic is pretty nice here. So we're going to play the Inkmoth Nexus instead of the Island there, and that's just to conceal information. They already saw the Nexus with their turn on Inquisition, but they only saw 2 islands, so as far as they know, we have 3 unknowns in hand. Opponent's going to start up, taking up, and yeah, we pretty much just got to throw away the turn spell again. Does not feel great. Liliana's very good against us, but again, we have the tools to beat her this game. Opponent plays a Dark Confidant. Now, this is an interesting spot because on the one hand, Dark Confidant is not a card we care that much about. We're a little bit more worried about some kind of a removal spell on our Dictate, or more threats, or more discard spells. Those are all bad. Dark Confidant, yeah, not so much. We're already giving them cards. Now, a thought that occurred to me is maybe, he could still make a land drop here. Maybe he's using the Confidant as bait. But let's say they are. So they can no longer Maelstrom Pulse us off of the Dictate. They can no longer... however, they can Abrupt Decay us. We can't do anything about that anyway. But Assassin's Trophy is also live on the Dictate. So for that reason, and also just because we don't care too much about the Dark Confidant, we're not going to Cryptic, we're going to let it resolve. Even though using your mana really efficiently is nice here, we also might be able to just resolve another Dictate and hang on to the Cryptic. That would be nice too. So we'll let the Confidant come in. They're going to move to attacks. If they've got other plays, they're sequencing well here. Not going to do anything about that. We'll take 3. And they go to the end step. Okay, so they do not have another land drop. That's pretty good for us, and that means we get to just flash in a second Dictate. Feels really good. And, wow, how nice is that? There's the Time Warp. We have the 5th land in hand. Even if we didn't draw that Time Warp and we had to go into the next turn with just Cryptic up, that would have been fine, but this is why Time Warp is a staple it is the card that you really need to see in the mid-game to really let you pull ahead. So, obviously go Island, Time Warp, take another turn. Drawing 3 per turn feels really, really good. We're continuing to make our land drops as well. That's really nice. And yeah, here we just have to take another turn. Now, there might be an argument for passing with Cryptic and Remand up if they didn't have the Liliana, and if they were not a deck that could potentially Maelstrom Pulse these Dictates away, but we just want to get further ahead before we give them the chance to do anything again, basically. So, yep, pretty clear we just have to spend the Part the Water Veil. Now, we've used 2 of them, we only have 1 left in the deck, so that's not ideal when we're still only on turn 6 going into 7. But do note that one of the ones we've already seen is still in the graveyard because we discarded it. So, turn 11 or later in the game, Snap Part the Water Veil is still alive. So, just something to keep in mind. But we're drawing 3 per turn. Like I said, our deck will provide once we get to this stage. So, however, not this turn. We don't have a turn spell to use right now. So, we're gonna get a little bold here. We're gonna go for the Jace. We could have just passed and Giga Drowsed them down for 6, but that doesn't feel great because then they still have Thoughtseize. They could go land Thoughtseize. They can take the Liliana up. That would have been fine, but I'm inclined to get a little bit more aggressive here with the Jace. So we're looking for these exhaustions. Exhaustion is exactly what we're looking for. We're also looking for a miracle to set up next turn. One of the 2 finds was a big payoff off of playing this Jace, and we found one of them. We found the exhaustions. So what we're going to do is put back some of the cards we want to protect from their Thoughtseize next turn if they have it. And we're going to exhaust them. And we're going to pass. So they get to draw 4. They find another Bob off of their Bob, and then they're going to draw 3. But they cannot untap, so let's see what they can do. Inquisition of Kozilek, sure. They'll take a Giga Drowse. I think that's the right play. And they're going to take up. We're going to pitch a Remand here. It's just a little bit less useful. If nothing else, just in terms of how you have to sequence to make it good at this point of the game. We don't want to be that reactive anymore. So they're going to put Jace down to 1. And they're going to hold up a fetch land, which means they are live. Their Fatal Pushes, or Path to Exiles perhaps, are live on our man land. So something to keep in mind. We're going to draw a bunch of cards we knew about. And we're going to see what Jace can turn up for us. Still no turn spell, so not ideal. So here's what we're going to do. Cryptic Command to bounce the Liliana. She's about to ultimate. She needs to be dealt with. So we had no choice here but to bounce her or to keep taking turns until we win the game. If we pass back, even if they're totally tapped down, Liliana's going to put a massive hurting on us and make the game go on. And much longer, and we don't want that. So first order of business, bounce the Liliana. Then we'll exhaust you. Then we'll just use our mana efficiently and play a Serum Visions. We see some cards that pretty much just both go to the bottom at this point of the game. So we're giving our opponent another turn, but again, we're not going to let them do much with it. They're continuing to find discard spells for the turns that they're exhausted, so that's pretty good for them. They'll take away another Giga Drowse. They'll play another land, and they'll pass it back. Alright, so we're about due to hit a turn spell. Another exhaustion is good. Still no turn spell, though. But it's good enough where we can Fate Seal with Jace. We're starting to get slightly low in the library. It's not anything too crazy, but again, remember we only have one part the Water Veil left in the deck. That could be buried all the way at the bottom. So we've got to start making sure we don't deck ourselves. We've got to start progressing toward a win con. And even though Fate Sealing without a turn spell isn't great, again, exhaustion is good enough. So we'll Fate Seal ourselves. That's usually the way to go. In this deck, you're just making your own draws better. You're not going to Fate Seal the opponent off of anything when they're drawing 4 cards per turn. In this case, it's simply not realistic. So we will exhaust them. Exhaustion has been absolutely incredible this game, and we get to pass with shields very firmly up. We have Remand and Cryptic Command. Opponent's going to draw 4. And the opponent, alright, they're Thought Seizing again, so just as a reminder, they curved out 1, 2, 3 beautifully, and they're also finding really good plays in the context of all these exhaustions. So our opponent is definitely really, really making us have it. So what do we do here? Do we Remand or do we Cryptic Command? Well, trick question. We're going to Remand. But that's not all. We're going to Remand our Remand. Pretty spicy, huh? So, like I said, these Remands are a little bit more reactive than we want to be right now. So we're basically just doing that so we can cycle one of them into a new draw. And we, of course, will then actually Remand the Thoughtseize. Pretty nice little trick if you are ever in that type of situation where, again, you just want to keep the draws going. You just want to be really mana efficient. We still have Cryptic, which is more of a catch-all for later turns that has wider utility than Remand. So, feel pretty good about that play. Opponent's got to let us have it. And now, we're really due for the turn spells, right? There we go. There's a Time Warp. Might as well lead off with a Serum, though. Okay, we find another Serum. We find a Temporal Mastery. Sure. Good stuff. There's the Serum and the Mastery. Okay, we see Island and Snapcaster Mage. So now we're going to brainstorm with the Jace. We're going to put back some cards we don't need. And then we're going to snap. So we took this line instead of plenty of the other ones just because we want to get a threat down as soon as possible. Again, we want to end the game in a timely fashion here. And they have been really aggressive on their own life total between fetching, shocking, thought seizing, and losing 2 from a Bob Trigger, that just a few hits from Snapcaster is going to do it. So we're no longer worried about milling out. The win is probably locked up here unless we whiff horribly. So there's the snap. Put him to 6. Take another turn. We're going to Fate Seal ourselves to be conservative with our cards in the library. You know, we could, just to be mana efficient here, Cryptic something, Cryptic to bounce and draw or whatever. It's just not necessary. We'll just keep it in hand. We'll just pitch a land and go again. And there we go. We found the Part the Water Veil. So, from here, pretty clearly just going to awaken a land and get in for lethal. Alright, so we did it. That was a fun game. We beat a really good curve from a tough matchup, and we did it thanks mostly to our opening hand, which was heavily loaded down with Mind Effects. These Mind Effects are absolutely fantastic against mid-range decks, against anything that plays a lot of discard, anything that plays permanent removal. You want a lot of these, and you want redundancy, because they will answer them. Whether it's discard or whether it's spot removal, they will answer them. We were able to stick a couple and sequence pretty optimally, as far as I can tell, throughout the mid-game. And even though we had to take some unconventional lines, like we had to pass it back to them a lot with Exhaustion as our only real way to pseudo-time walk them, the deck still gets there. That is why I don't think we need to play more than 10 turn spells in a deck like this, because even in a game like this where we missed an unusual amount of times on finding a turn spell off the top, we still got there pretty comfortably, I might add. Once we hit our stride, it was pretty comfortable. So, cool game. Let's take a look. Alright, we are here for sideboarding to take a look at our options. Now, the more I play this deck, the more I kind of like the idea that I mentioned in the deck tech about playing a second Ancestral Vision in the side. That's looking like it's really good in mid-range and control matchups, especially mid-range, and since we can't play Commandeer online due to the MTGO bug, Commandeer shining in against both of those archetypes itself, maybe I do want to bring in another one of these, keep it in my sideboard. I think I might try that in the future, but for now, looking at what we have, just like in the Panza matchup, just like I said in the deck tech, a lot of these mid-range decks, even though they play a lot of creatures that Negate is dead against, Negate is still a fantastic card, because the creatures, while they might literally kill us, they might be the ones that actually close out the game, they're not the spells that we need to counter then and there, or we are in bad shape. The spells that we need to counter when they're played are, first and foremost, Liliana of the Veil, and secondly, spot removal for our Mind Effects, whether it be Assassin's Trophy or Maelstrom Pulse. Abrupt Decay cannot be countered, but for the others, that's live. And thirdly, discard spells, even though that's tempo negative to counter a 1-mana discard with a 2-mana negate, it's still very, very good. So I'm pretty happy to bring in both negates in this matchup. Otherwise, I don't really know what we're into. Hibernation is too cute. I don't really care to bounce their Tarmogoyfs and Scavenging Oozes. It's just not that good. Relic of Progenitus is the only other one I would really consider. These cards are dead. Chalice is horrible against a traditional curve. Surgical Extraction is very bad because it's card disadvantage against a discard deck. There's way too much removal flying around for Thing in the Ice, and Echoing Truth, similar to Surgical, is a card disadvantage play that we don't want any part of. So these are the three cards to consider. As a BGX player myself, I am not displeased at all when people side in Relics and especially other Grave Hate against me. Relic can at least replace itself, but Grave Hate in general is kind of medium. So we're going to consider these three. I'm not necessarily thrilled about the Relic, but it might be worth bringing in. So what don't we like? Well, this is another matchup. Against these mid-range decks, all of our cards are kind of good. They really are all kind of good. We can cut a Giga Drowse that's pretty free, and we can card apart the Water Veil. Again, just as a general way to trim. Against Ponza, I would cut a Cryptic Command. I think here Cryptic's utility is a little bit higher. This might be incorrect, but I'm actually going to cut a land. So, because we're going to be on the draw, it's an island. If we were on the play, it would be Gemstone Cavern. Even though we really want to make our land drops, and I usually recommend cutting lands only when you try to race and you're bringing in Thing, here we are kind of just increasing the density of action in our deck to make their discard-heavy draws. We're just a little bit more resilient against that. That might not be correct. It's a little borderline, but look at the deck. There's nothing else that's bad. Like, everything we do is pretty much good against a mid-range deck, so we're going to run it with something like this. We'll see how it goes. Alright, everybody, we're back for Game 2 against Abzan Midrange, and our hand is spectacular. We have 3 land, which is perfect. We have 2 Mind Effects, which is great. We really need 1 to stick against a deck like this. And we have Interaction. Now, Remand is fantastic. It's a little unfortunate we're on the draw with this hand, but otherwise we cannot complain. The Giga Drowse is just fine too. So, opponent has taken a mull. They've taken another mull. Ooh, they go to 5. That is not good for them, but they can still put a beating on us from that position, especially on the play. They do not have turn 1 discard, which is nice. And we don't have any turn 1 action either. Play an island, pass it back. Opponent just has to pass again, so they have no 2 mana threat. This makes me very suspicious of a turn 3 Liliana. Now, maybe a little less suspicious than I would be if they kept, a 7 or a 6, but still, the odds that they don't have any action turn 1 and turn 2, especially both, post side, means I'm really suspicious for the Liliana. So, taking our next turn. We're continuing to draw land, not very exciting, but that's actually quite fine. So, we might be tempted to play the Howling Mine here, but that would be a little sketchy even in the best of times, Even if we had reason to believe that they were not sitting on a Liliana, that would be a little bit sketchy, because we do have the Dictate for next turn. Now, if Howling Mine was our only Mine effect in hand, I might run it out. I probably would, actually, but because we have the Dictate for next turn and the Remand for this turn, we are perfectly content to pass. So they made their 3rd land drop. And there it is, the Liliana. So, send her back to the hand. Find another Howling Mine. Okay, we're starting not to really need these, but you never know. Serum Visions is an interesting draw. It makes me really want to consider playing Howling Mine into Serum Visions, but because our opponent mulliganed, they're still a little light on cards. we just don't really want to give them another draw right now. You know, maybe they're going to be stuck on 3 land and they just have to jam the Lily again. Or maybe they're going to have the 4th land but no 1 mana play. The Howling Mine could make it line up so they go Liliana, land, Thoughtseize. That would be pretty bad. So, even though it's kind of tempting to double spell there with Howling Mine into Serum and sculpt our next turn or two's draws, I think it's correct to just... We're bluffing counter magic too, you know? That's another thing. Maybe we'll incentivize them to play like 2/2 drops instead of the Liliana if they think we might have counter magic here. But nope, they go ahead and slam the Liliana. Sure. They're going to make us discard, and we're pretty much okay to pitch a Howling Mine here. And they did make the 4th land drop, but they're going to pass. They pitch a Siege Rhino. Okay. In comes our Dictate. We'll untap. And would you look at that? I believe in miracles right off the top. Gotta love it. We were already in a pretty good position despite the Liliana, but that just makes it so much better. It always does. So, and look at that. Look at that. So, this is the power of Temporal Mastery in the deck. That miracle makes it so we are just going to go off, like out of nowhere. We had an empty board when they passed the turn to us. On their end step, we flash in the Dictate, we untap, we miracle off the top, we make another land drop, and now we're just going to get to go again and play Time Warp and just go off. And even better, we get to stick a second Mine effect here. So this went from like a solid progression to just insane due to that miracle. Also worth noting, the value of both Mine effects, you know, the different pros and cons of each, which I went over a little bit in the deck tech. Dictate was amazing here because it let us avoid giving them that 2-spell turn that I mentioned we were wary of. But Howling Mine is also really nice here because it allows us to maximally capitalize on the miracle by getting yet more value out of that turn. The miracle alone would have been enough. Miracle and Serum Visions would have been great. Miracle and Howling Mine is even better. So now we are just in business. We're making more land drops. We're finding more turn spells. So, yep, we're going to go land into Time Warp. Go again. More land. Alright. So, no turn spell we can cast quite yet, so we will lead on Serum Visions. Okay, we're finding things that we don't really need, so those can probably both go to the bottom. And we do have Exhaustion. We'll exhaust you. We'll make a land drop and we'll pass. So we're giving the opponent kind of one last shot to do something impactful here. They do get to draw 3. They're going to take up their Liliana. We're just pitching an island. We are already sitting on 8 mana. We're drawing 3 cards per turn. Land is no longer an issue. And our opponent just has to pass. They did not make another land drop. Now, it's worth just stopping to consider here. Maybe they did have an Inquisition or a Thoughtseize, but they just think they're not going to stop us. You know, we've got 5 cards in hand, we're going to draw 3 more. Maybe they're holding up spot removal. A lot of spot removal will come out against us post-side, but perhaps not all of it, especially in a deck like this, so it's worth bearing that in mind so we don't run headlong into a Fatal Push or a Path to Exile when it's time to animate our Water Veil. So, moving on. Yep. Some decent draws, but we're just gonna go ahead and Temporal Mastery. Go again. And we found a part of the Water Veil. Cool. No reason not to lead on Serum Visions here. We're kind of past the point of the game where Mikokoro is highly desirable, plus we already have a Giga Drowse, and I don't think we'll be needing even the one we have, so bottom, and make a land drop, play our Temporal Mastery, go again. Alright, so we are at 9 mana, but for the reason that I mentioned earlier, we're not going to simply play Ink Moth, animate it with Part of the Water Veil, because that's a good way to get it Fatal Pushed. So, we're going to Serum. We find another Part of the Water Veil. That's wonderful. Now we're willing to get a little bit more aggressive. But our opponent has just seen enough, and they'll scoop it up. And some people don't seem to really know when to scoop it up against taking turns. Some people, and if they know when they're pretty dead, but they want to make us play it out anyway, that is 100% their right. More power to them. I have no problem with that at all. But some people seem to just kind of still expect us to fizzle after a certain point of the game when it's simply not going to happen. And other people will scoop like right away. That is an extreme minority of people, but some people just, maybe they're just tilted, maybe they just think the deck is deterministic, I don't know. This opponent here, I think, scooped at the appropriate time. They stuck it out for a while in game 1, when I was a little bit wobbly with what I was finding off the top. I had to lean really heavily on exhaustions instead of turn spells. And here they stuck it out, I think, the appropriate amount of time. They perhaps sense that I'm not going to play into their Fatal Push if they had one. And we are just at an overwhelming advantage at this point. I think it's perfectly fine for them to scoop here. So, that was quite a fun match. We got to pull off the old remand, and then actually remand the opponent's spell trick. We got to play a nice interactive game. We got to beat Liliana of the Veil both games. We got to beat a really impressive curve and some really impressive plays through exhaustions from our opponent game 1. And game 2, we saw the absolute power of miracles. We just saw how incredible they can be. So, all in all, a nice little match to demonstrate the power of taking turns and the variety of progressions that the deck gives rise to. It is just a joy to play. I continue to think that it's quite well positioned in the format, especially relative to its popularity and the perception of its strength by the broader public. So, yeah, GG's, well played from the opponent. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you would like to see more content like this, I would deeply appreciate a like and a subscribe above all. The subscribe is pretty key, and I will continue to bring you content with as much regularity as I can muster. And yeah, thanks again for watching. Stay tuned for the next one.